I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you are, I don't know, scrolling through your feed or just walking down a really bustling city street
Right.
and you see it. That one luxury item you have been craving for months.
Oh, yeah. We all know that feeling.
Right. Maybe it's a wildly expensive designer watch or one of those exclusive waitlisted leather bags that cost more than a card. You know the exact one I mean.
Oh, absolutely.
You want it so badly. Like the desire is practically vibrating in your bones because having it means you've made it. It means you are part of the in crowd. But you can't afford it. Or maybe it's just completely sold out and, impossible to get your hands on.
Yeah, it's that classic, just visceral human ache for status.
Exactly.
It's the realization that you are on the outside of a very specific, very desirable social boundary.
Right. And you're so desperate to project that status, to somehow cross that boundary, that you decide to basically take matters into your own hands.
Okay, I see where this is going.
You go to a local hardware store, buy some cheap everyday materials, and you meticulously construct a visually identical fake. You paint on the logo, you mimic the stitching, and you carry it around hoping nobody looks too closely.
Which people do all the time today, obviously.
Right. And you would probably assume I'm talking about a modern metropolis here.
Yeah.
Like fast fashion, Canal Street knockoffs, our modern obsession with branding. But here is the mind-blowing part of the sources we are looking at today.
Yeah, this is the twist.
I want you to take that exact scenario, the craving for luxury, the status anxiety, the creation of a visual counterfeit, and transport it back in time. Not 100 years, not 1,000 years.
So much further back than that.
We are talking about 7,500 years ago on a remote, sun-blasted desert island.
Which fundamentally challenges like the standard narrative of human cognitive development. I mean, we have this ingrained bias that ancient humans were purely pragmatic.
That they were just surviving.
Right. That every waking moment was dedicated to acquiring calories and avoiding predators. So finding out they were dedicating immense time and energy to faking luxury goods completely rewrites the timeline of human vanity.
It really does. So welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We have a truly incredible stack of sources in front of us today. We're looking at recent archaeological reports, historical analyses, and some really striking visual evidence from an era known as the Ubaid period.
Roughly around 5500 BC.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission today is to explore humanity's very first maritime network. We are going to look at the mechanics of how people managed to traverse a 1,000-kilometer ocean route using shockingly ingenious ancient technology.
The secret of the reed boats. It's fascinating.
It is. We'll examine the specific economies of what they were risking their lives to trade like, exchanging pearls for luxury goods. And finally, we will unpack how this exchange sparked the world's very first recorded knockoff culture.
It's a huge story.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this because the sheer scale of the 1,000-kilometer divide between these two cultures is the crux of the whole thing. We are anchoring ourselves in 5,500 BC.
Right. And to contextualize 5500 BC, we are deep in the late Neolithic, the new Stone Age.
Which means no metal tools, right?
Exactly. This is 3,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. We are millennia away from written language, the wheel, or, bronze metallurgy. Society operates on stone, bone, wood, clay, and just human muscle.
Just pure human grit.
Yeah. And in this specific window of time, two radically distinct ecological and cultural spheres begin to interact.
So let's map those out for everyone. On one side of this 1,000-kilometer divide, we have Mesopotamia, essentially modern-day Iraq. It's positioned in that incredibly fertile alluvial plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
The cradle of civilization.
Exactly. And from the sources, this is a society hitting a major inflection point. They are moving away from purely nomadic hunting and gathering, and they're establishing the very early forms of agrarian villages.
Right. They're managing irrigation, committing to specific plots of land.
And we are starting to see the early murmurs of societal hierarchy,
Well, yeah, because this shift to agriculture in Mesopotamia creates a surplus of calories. And surplus is the engine of complexity.
Because you're not just constantly looking for your next meal.
Precisely. When you no longer have to spend every single hour foraging, you can dedicate time to specialized labor, like advanced pottery making, architecture, or in this case, complex boat building. You start seeing the very early iterations of proto-urban centers, places like Eridu. They are rooted in the mud of the river valleys, building outward.
Okay, so that's Mesopotamia. Then we have the other end of this network. You travel 1,000 kilometers south, down through the Persian Gulf, and you hit the coastal regions of the modern-day United Arab Emirates, the Arabian Peninsula.
And the contrast there is just stark.
It really is. I mean, the history of UAE trade goes back so far, right?
Yeah.
7,500 years.
Yes, the ecological contrast completely dictates the lifestyle. The Ubaid period in Mesopotamia is defined by agriculture, but the contemporaneous period in the UAE, which is often referred to as the Arabian Neolithic, is defined by a highly specialized adaptation to a hyper-arid coastal environment.
Because the interior is just unforgiving desert.
Right, so the populations are tethered to the coastlines and the shallow, nutrient-rich waters of the Gulf.
And the sources show they are heavily nomadic or semi-nomadic, moving with the seasons. They don't have these massive irrigated wheat fields. Their protein comes from herding sheep and goats, but primarily they are maritime foragers.
They're harvesting shellfish, fishing, hunting marine turtles and dugongs.
So they are intimately tied to the rhythms of the sea.
They are, but the distinction is that their marine exploitation is local. They are fishing in the shallows, perhaps using small rafts or just wading. They're not initially embarking on deep-water, open ocean voyages. The Gulf itself is, frankly, an intimidating body of water.
Which brings us to the logistical nightmare of this maritime network. We aren't talking about a quick hop across a river.
No, not at all.
The geographic reality is 1,000 kilometers of the open waters of the Persian or Arabian Gulf. If you look at modern sailing metrics covering 1,000 kilometers, which is roughly 540 nautical miles, at a generous prehistoric speed of maybe 3 knots, you are looking at over a week of continuous non-stop sailing.
And that's assuming perfect weather.
Right, which the Gulf definitely does not have. It's notorious for the shamal, these sudden, violent northwesterly winds that just whip up massive swells.
Yeah, and that week of sailing requires carrying all your fresh water, all your provisions, without any modern navigation tools, all while hugging a coastline that offers very few natural safe harbors in the event of a storm.
Right, 7,500 years ago, people are basically just figuring out how to plant seeds in a straight line, and they are already planning massive international trade routes across an ocean. I mean, human ambition is wild.
What's fascinating here is that it completely upends our assumptions. History often paints early humans as isolated, just scrambling to survive. But this evidence proves they were deeply ambitious. They were actively seeking connections far beyond their immediate survival needs.
And it's one thing to stand on a beach in Mesopotamia and think, I wonder what's down there. It's another thing entirely to commit the immense labor and risk required to actually find out.
Exactly.
We have this aerial photograph in the source materials showing archaeological trenches dug into the sand on one of these UAE islands. You look down from the drone shot, and amidst this endless expanse of pale desert, there are these sharp geometric cuts revealing the faint stone foundations of ancient structures.
It's an incredible image.
It really is. It's haunting to realize this entire international network, literally humanity's first maritime highway, was just swallowed by the sand, completely hidden and forgotten until very recently.
And those foundations represent the physical footprint of this ambition. The mere existence of Mesopotamian goods in those UAE trenches forces us to reevaluate the risk tolerance of Neolithic humans.
Because the risk of drowning had to be massive.
Right. We tend to assume early humans were inherently risk-averse, driven solely by immediate survival. But committing to a 1,000-kilometer ocean voyage suggests a powerful psychological driver, a desire for discovery, or more likely an intense economic incentive that made the severe risk of drowning mathematically acceptable to them.
But ambition is one thing and execution is another, right? Because ambition doesn't float.
It certainly does not.
We established they don't have metal tools. They aren't felling giant oaks to build massive wooden galleons with iron nails. So how exactly did they cross 1,000 kilometers of treacherous water? The primary mode of transport was the reed bundle boat.
Yes, the reed boat.
Now, I understand that tall marsh reeds, like the giant reeds in southern Iraq, are buoyant, but they are essentially organic sponges.
Pretty much.
If you just tie a bunch of grass together, it might float for a day, but it's going to get waterlogged and sink. The physical engineering required to cross 1,000 kilometers in a grass boat is what I really want to unpack here.
The engineering is arguably one of the greatest technological leaps of the era. They had to harvest fragments reeds, which grow abundantly in the southern Mesopotamian marshes, but they couldn't just use them fresh.
They just rot or sink.
Exactly. They likely had to cure them, drying them out to maximize buoyancy, then tightly lash them into massive bundles using plant fiber cordage. These bundles become the structural ribs and hull of the vessel. But as you noted, Untreated reeds will rapidly absorb water, increasing the vessel's displacement until it founders.
Which is where the Ubaid people deploy what I can only describe as prehistoric industrial chemistry.
Bitumen.
Yes, bitumen. The bitumen waterproofing technology is the linchpin of this entire maritime network.
For those who don't know, what exactly is it? It is a highly viscous, semi-solid form of petroleum. In certain areas of Mesopotamia, particularly around places like modern-day Hit in Iraq, tectonic activity forces this crude oil to the surface.
Just bubbling right up out of the ground.
Right. And where the lighter hydrocarbons evaporate, it leaves behind this dense, black, sticky, natural asphalt.
So they're essentially gathering raw, bubbling road tar from geological seeps.
They are. But applying it is a complex thermal and chemical process. You can't just smear cold bitumen onto reeds. It's too thick and brittle. They had to heat it to a specific temperature to make it workable, transforming it into a thermoplastic.
Wow.
Furthermore, archaeological analysis shows they weren't just using pure bitumen, they were tempering it.
Wait, tempering it like mixing aggregate into concrete?
Exactly like that. They mixed the heated bitumen with chopped straw, sand, and sometimes clay. This composite material prevented the bitumen from shattering when it hit cold ocean water and stopped it from melting into a puddle under the intense Arabian sun.
That is so smart.
They created a highly resilient, durable mastic, and they slathered a thick layer of it over the entire exterior of the reed bundle hull.
I used this analogy when I was reading the sources. So if I'm understanding this right, their vessel was essentially a giant ancient paddle board made of grass, held together by string, and completely encased in a shell of hot road tar.
That is a surprisingly accurate description.
The sensory experience of building and sailing that must have been overwhelming. The smell of sulfur and tar, the sheer weight of the boat once that bitumen cooled and hardened. I mean, stepping onto one of these in the open ocean takes some serious bravery.
The weight would have been substantial, which definitely adds to the logistical complexity of launching and beaching the vessels. But that heavy, hardened shell created an incredibly effective waterproof barrier. The reeds provided the buoyancy, the bitumen provided the impermeability.
And we have concrete, or rather bituminous proof of this, right? Which is one of the most fascinating archaeological forensic discoveries I've ever read about.
The H3 site.
Yes. It comes from the H3 site in Kuwait. Geographically, Kuwait sits right along that Gulf coast, serving as a natural waypoint between Mesopotamia and the UAE. When archaeologists were excavating this site, they found massive piles of what looked like mundane black rocks, which turned out to be chunks of processed bitumen.
The H3 site is paramount because it provides the physical, smoking gun evidence for this technology. Those chunks of bitumen aren't just raw material, they are fragments of a deconstructed or destroyed vessel.
And the way the archaeologists read these chunks is just like a microscopic crime scene. On one side of the bitumen, the interior face, they found these perfect, fossilized negative impressions.
Like a mold.
Exactly. You can clearly see the rigid parallel lines of the reed bundles, and crossing over them, the distinct twisted weave of the ropes. It's a literal mold of human engineering from 7,500 years ago.
It confirms the construction method perfectly. We can actually analyze the twist of the cordage from those impressions to understand their textile technology.
That's crazy.
But the exterior face of those same bitumen chunks provides an even more critical piece of data.
The barnacles.
The barnacles. Attached to the smooth outer face of the bitumen were the calcified remains of marine barnacles.
And the significance here is about time and salinity, right? Because a barnacle doesn't just attach to a piece of wood floating down a freshwater river for an afternoon.
Right. The specific species of barnacles found require a highly saline environment, meaning they only thrive in the open ocean of the Gulf, not the brackish estuaries of southern Mesopotamia. Moreover, the size and development of the barnacle shells indicate prolonged exposure.
So they were out there for a long time.
Yes. These organisms take months to reach the sizes observed on the H3 bitumen.
So the rope marks prove unequivocally that it was a manufactured boat, and the mature barnacles prove unequivocally that this specific boat spent a massive amount of time deep in the salty ocean. It wasn't just a river skiff that accidentally drifted out to sea.
It is the oldest direct physical evidence of an ocean-faring vessel in human history. It bridges the gap between theoretical reconstruction and hard empirical reality.
And we know they weren't just rowing these massive heavy tar boats for 1,000 kilometers, which would require an unsustainable amount of human caloric energy. The sources highlight pottery shards found at these coastal sites that depict something revolutionary: masts.
Incorporating a mast means they had harnessed wind power, which is a massive leap in maritime capability. Rowing a heavy bitumen-coated vessel against the prevailing Gulf currents would be grueling, if not impossible, for long distances.
There is an incredible visual source that pairs a modern scale model of one of these Ubaid boats with an ancient artifact.
I love that comparison.
The model shows this very elegant, pronounced crescent shape. The bow and stern sweep upward quite aggressively. There are crew members with oars, but right in the center is a substantial mast holding a square woven sail.
And that crescent shape is not merely stylistic. It is highly functional naval architecture. The elevated bow allows the vessel to ride over the steep short-period waves typical of the Persian Gulf, rather than plunging through them and taking on water, which is catastrophic for an open-decked boat.
It's designed for survival. And right next to the model image is this ancient circular disc, maybe clay or stone, and etched into it is a very minimalist but unmistakable drawing of that exact crescent-shaped boat. And critically, the 7,500-year-old etching clearly shows two vertical lines extending up from the hull, two masts.
Depicting a two-masted vessel implies a sophisticated understanding of sail balance and wind capture. It allows for better steering and speed. The fact that they are memorializing these vessels in their artwork underscores how central this technology was to their cultural identity. The boat was the space shuttle of the Neolithic.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to ask what could possibly be valuable enough to risk your life on a tar-covered grass boat for 1,000 kilometers?
That is the pivotal question.
What is the economic driver that justifies this massive supply chain? Let's talk about the cargo. We know Mesopotamia is the industrial powerhouse in this scenario. What are they exporting south to the UAE?
The premier luxury export of the Mesopotamian Ubaid culture was their highly advanced pottery.
And we need to clarify that this isn't just someone shaping mud into a cup and throwing it in a campfire. The sources emphasize this was a sophisticated ceramic technology.
The Ubaid artisans had developed techniques that were revolutionary. They were carefully sourcing specific clays, likely utilizing early forms of levitation to remove impurities, which allows for a much finer, thinner vessel wall. They may have been using early slow wheels or turnettes to achieve perfect symmetry, but the real technological leap was in the firing.
Achieving high temperatures.
Exactly. They were building complex kilns capable of sustaining temperatures well over 1,000 degrees Celsius. This high firing temperature changes the chemical structure of the clay, making it incredibly hard, durable, and less porous. The resulting pottery often featured a distinct, creamy, light green or buff-colored slip.
And then there is the aesthetic component. We have a visual of a Ubaid jar. It has a wide belly, a narrow flared neck, two delicate handles. But the striking feature is the paint. Over that pale background, the artisans hand-painted these incredibly precise, jet-black geometric patterns. Thick bands, repeating zigzags, intricate interlocking chevrons.
That's beautiful.
The symmetry and the steady hand required are remarkable.
The pigments used were likely iron or manganese oxides, which can withstand the kiln temperatures without burning off. The geometric designs are highly standardized across Ubaid sites, which suggests a shared cultural iconography, a specific brand, if you will, that carried deep social meaning.
And we know this was the primary export because the UAE is absolutely littered with it. The archaeological sites on Marwa Island, Dalma Island, and throughout Ras Al Khaimah reveal this jarring juxtaposition.
The contrast in the dig sites is amazing.
It is. Excavators are digging through the refuse heaps of these nomadic coastal communities. Massive layers of prehistoric fish bones, turtle shells, discarded oyster shells, and mixed right in with the fish guts are hundreds of shards of this exquisite, high-tech Mesopotamian painted pottery.
The context of where it's found is crucial. To the nomadic peoples of the UAE, this pottery was practically alien technology. They lived on sandy, arid coasts. They did not have access to the fine alluvial clays of Mesopotamia. More importantly, their highly mobile, semi-nomadic lifestyle made building permanent, high-temperature kilns impossible.
Because if you are moving every few months, you aren't building a massive mud brick oven.
Their indigenous containers were likely made from woven palm fronds, leather, or hollowed gourds and shells, functional but organic and perishable. Suddenly, these mariners arrived from the north, carrying perfectly symmetrical, rock-hard, waterproof vessels decorated with mesmerizing alien geometry.
I keep thinking of the Ubaid pottery as the iPhone of the Neolithic era. If you've only ever communicated via carrier pigeon and someone hands you a glowing rectangle of glass, your perception of what a tool can be is fundamentally shattered.
That's a great way to look at it.
The pottery was an imported luxury that broadcasted your connection to this vast, unseen world. But trade is a two-way street. The Mesopotamians aren't sailing 1,000 kilometers just to hand out free bowls. What is the UAV putting in the hull of those reed boats for the return journey?
The UAE region possessed a resource that would have been entirely mythical to the inland farmers of Mesopotamia: natural pearls.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Pearls. It instantly reframes the entire economic dynamic.
The shallow, warm, highly saline waters of the Persian Gulf, particularly around the islands like Marawa, are the perfect natural habitat for Pinctada radiata, the Gulf pearl oyster. For millennia, up until the invention of the cultured pearl in the 20th century, the Gulf was the premier source of natural pearls globally.
And the archaeological evidence backs this up. The digs at Marwa Island didn't just find oyster shells discarded from dinner, they found actual prehistoric pearls.
Yes, and beautifully preserved.
And incredibly, they found finely carved buttons and ornaments made from the iridescent mother of pearl harvested from the interior of the shells.
Which indicates they had an established local industry of processing and crafting these marine resources. Alongside the pearls, the UAE nomads were likely exporting vast quantities of sun-dried and salted fish, which provided essential protein to the growing, densely packed agrarian villages of Mesopotamia, as well as exotic materials like sea turtle carapaces.
Now, this is where we have to dive into the deep sociology of this exchange because it highlights a concept that economists still debate today: the subjective theory of value. I mean, why trade a beautiful, rare gem like a natural pearl for a clay bowl?
Right, it seems uneven at first glance.
If we look at this through a purely utilitarian lens, it makes zero sense. On one side, you have a natural pearl. To harvest that pearl, a human being has to hold their breath, dive deep into the treacherous currents of the Gulf, risk drowning or predation, harvest dozens if not hundreds of oysters, just to find one perfectly round, shimmering gem. It requires immense physical risk and labor.
And on the other side, you have a bowl. Yes, it requires specialized knowledge of kilns and levitation, but fundamentally it is baked mud. It is made from materials that are abundant and cheap in its place of origin.
Exactly. So why on earth does the pearl diver trade their incredibly hard-won, precious gem for a bowl of baked mud?
Because value is not intrinsic. It is dictated by scarcity, context, and social signaling. Let's analyze the Mesopotamian perspective. An Ubaid farmer lives surrounded by mud. They can throw a rock and hit a clay deposit. The pottery is useful, but it isn't rare. But a pearl.
To them, it's exotic.
Exactly. A perfectly spherical, luminescent object that reflects light in a way nothing else in their environment does, pulled from the depths of a terrifying distant sea, that possesses immense semiotic value.
It's a flex. Wearing a pearl necklace in a Mesopotamian village signals to everyone else that you have excess wealth, that you have connections to exotic, faraway lands, that you participate in high-level trade.
The pearl is a localized concentration of status. Now, flip the perspective to the UAE nomad. To them, the pearl is a local product. It requires labor, yes, but oysters are a part of their daily landscape. The mother of pearl is beautiful, but familiar.
Just a byproduct of their lunch.
But the Ubaid jar is a marvel. It doesn't rot, it holds water perfectly, and it carries this striking foreign aesthetic. For a UAE chieftain or family head, possessing an Ubaid painted jar signals that they successfully navigated the complex social and economic transaction with these foreign mariners. It demonstrates their negotiating power and elevates their status within their own local hierarchy.
It's fascinating to consider the logistics of that negotiation. We are talking about two cultures separated by over 1,000 kilometers. It is highly unlikely they spoke the same language or shared the same cultural idioms.
The language barrier introduces the concept of silent trade, or highly formalized barter systems, where trust has to be established through repeated, ritualized interactions over seasons. They had to collectively agree on a completely abstract exchange rate. How many dried fish equal one painted bowl? How many pearls buy a shipment of ceramics?
They were establishing a prehistoric forex market on the beach. But whenever there is a highly coveted, hard-to-get luxury item in any society, human nature dictates that someone, somewhere, is going to try and fake it.
Without fail.
And the demand for these painted bowls in the UAE became so intense and the supply so inherently limited by the dangers of the maritime journey that human nature took its inevitable, predictable course. Which brings us to the archaeological site on Dolma Island and the birth of the 7,500-year-old counterfeit market.
The Dolma Island discoveries provide a phenomenal window into human psychology. The supply chain constraints were severe. If a boat sank, or if the channel winds prevented a seasonal crossing, the supply of authentic Ubaid pottery dropped to zero. But the social demand, The need to possess this specific status symbol to maintain your social standing remained sky high.
The local demand completely outstripped the imported supply, so the local UAE populations decided to bridge that gap themselves.
They engaged in technological mimicry, but they were constrained by their environment. As we established, they didn't have the fine alluvial clay, and they couldn't build the high-temperature kilns required to make true ceramics. But they understood their local geology. The Arabian Peninsula has abundant deposits of limestone and gypsum.
Which they used to make plaster.
Producing plaster requires a much lower thermal threshold than firing clay. You can calcine gypsum, essentially roasting it to drive off the water molecules, at temperatures as low as 150 to 200 degrees Celsius, which is easily achievable with an open campfire. Once you crush that calcined rock into a powder and mix it with water, it undergoes a chemical reaction and hardens into a solid shape.
It's a brilliant local adaptation. They are using the materials at hand to solve a supply problem. But the physical properties of plaster are vastly inferior to high-fired clay, right?
Vastly. Plaster is softer, it is highly porous, it chips easily, and it degrades if exposed to too much moisture. It is a terrible material for a functional bowl meant to hold liquids.
But the functionality wasn't the point.
The functionality was entirely secondary to the visual aesthetic. Archaeologists found these locally manufactured plaster bowls at Dolma Island, and what makes them extraordinary is the surface treatment. The local artisans took pigments and painstakingly painted the surfaces with black lines, creating the exact same repeating zigzags and V-shaped chevron patterns found on the imported Mesopotamian pottery.
They created a visually identical knockoff. The material is wrong, the thermal processing is wrong, the durability is non-existent, but if you hold it up from 3 feet away, it looks like authentic Ubaid luxury.
It is a skeuomorph, a derivative object that retains the ornamental design cues of the original, even when those cues are no longer functionally necessary in the new material.
I cannot get over how deeply relatable this is. This is literally the prehistoric version of buying a fake designer bag out of a car trunk because the real one is sold out or too expensive. You know it's fake, it might even fall apart in the rain, but you are banking on the fact that your peers will only see the visual signifier of the brand. Like, oh, nice bowl, yeah, totally a Ubaid import, cost me 3 pearls.
The humor and the relatability is profound, but this raises an important question. What does the existence of a counterfeit tell us about these people?
That they were just as obsessed with status as we are.
Yes, and that this proves the interaction was far more profound than just trading calories for tools. It was a true cultural exchange. The UAE locals weren't just adopting a tool, they were adopting an aesthetic, a brand, and a symbol of status.
It highlights how human desires for prestige, trend chasing, and social signaling were just as active 7,500 years ago as they are today. If you couldn't access the real trade network, you faked the aesthetic just to ensure you weren't left behind in the local social hierarchy. This was the true foundation of an international network.
This shared aesthetic agreement, the mutual understanding that this black zigzag pattern holds abstract value, is the connective tissue of globalization. It means their minds were connected, their social structures were reacting to each other long after the physical reed boats had sailed back north.
It is a phenomenal slice of our shared history. To see the mechanics of vanity, ambition, and economics playing out with plaster and tar millennia before the first pyramid. Let's recap the sheer scale of what we've unpacked today. We started in 5500 BC at the dawn of complex agrarian society in Mesopotamia. We tracked the incredible ambition required to look across 1,000 kilometers of treacherous ocean and see a destination.
And we broke down the staggering prehistoric engineering of the reed boats.
Yes, the chemical mastery of tempered bitumen and the forensic proof left behind by barnacles and fossilized ropes in Kuwait.
We observed the mechanics of the world's earliest global market, navigating the subjective value of deep-sea pearls exchanged for the high-tech marvel of kiln-fired painted pottery.
And ultimately, we saw how that fierce demand for exotic status symbols led to the world's first counterfeit luxury goods, painstakingly painted onto fragile plaster on a desert island just to keep up with the Neolithic Joneses.
The through line here is the consistency of human nature. The next time you observe the massive scale of modern global shipping, a steel cargo vessel carrying thousands of containers across the Pacific, or the next time you see someone conspicuously flaunting a luxury logo, recognize that the hardware has changed, but the software running in our brains is identical. The Ubaid people on their tar-covered reed boats prove that our fundamental human drives haven't really changed in 7,500 years.
It really puts our modern obsessions into a humbling perspective. And I want to leave you with a final, lingering question to ponder on your own today. We always assume that humanity invents new technology purely for survival. We view invention as a reaction to starvation, climate pressure, or conflict. But looking at the Ubaid people, willingly risking their lives on the open ocean, inventing advanced composite materials and complex naval architecture, just to cross an ocean to trade shiny beads and pretty painted bowls, you have to wonder, was it actually the desire for luxury and status that truly drove the invention of advanced maritime technology? Maybe human vanity is the real engine of progress. Think about that the next time you're tempted by a knockoff. Until next time, keep digging deep.